Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Planetarium live stream. My name is Jessica. I'm the director of the Planetarium, and with me tonight is one of our grad students who works in the Planetarium. I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
So tonight, since we are at the beginning of the month, we are going to be taking a look at what you can expect to see up in the skies throughout the month. There's actually quite a bit going on. So a lot of good things to look forward to. And then at the end, we'll also take a look at a couple of news things that have happened recently. One that just happened like an hour ago. Excuse me. So as I get set up, um, if you have any questions throughout the show tonight, feel free to leave them down in the comments. We will be keeping an eye on those, and we'll try and answer them as they come up. If we don't get to them right away, there will be time at the end to answer questions as well. I'm going to take a sip of water because I got a little tickle in my throat. Okay. So as usual with our What's Up shows, we're going to start by taking a look at what's going on with the moon this month. So of course, throughout the month, the moon goes through phases where we see different amounts of it lit up. The third quarter phase happens today, actually, which I think I have this down on the slide wrong, actually. It's supposed to be May 3rd, so it was 2 days ago. So we're just past the third quarter phase. Next up is the new moon phase coming up on May 11th. Then on May 19th, we have the first quarter phase, and then May 26th, we have the full moon. Also on the slide are the rise and set times, since the different phases do rise and set at different times and are visible at different times throughout the day and night. And so this way you can know when you can see that phase. Now, most full moons each month have some sort of a nickname to them. And for the month of May, the full moon in May is known as the milk moon. I've also seen it called the flower moon or the corn harvest moon. It's all about, spring and things coming back and getting ready for planting and spring. I don't have a better way of saying that. Anyway, the full moon happening this month is also what we call a supermoon. So a supermoon happens when the moon is a little bit closer to us during that full moon phase. You may not know this, but the moon's orbit around the Earth is not a perfect circle. It's actually a little bit squished, a little elliptical. So as it orbits around the Earth throughout the month, it does spend a little bit of time a little bit closer and sometime a little bit further away. And when that closest approach happens during a full moon, that's what we call a supermoon. If you remember, we had a supermoon last month, and we're going to have another one this month, with this month's supermoon happening when the moon is at the closest approach it'll be at during a full moon, which just means that this month's supermoon is the largest supermoon of the year 2021. Now you can see here that when we say supermoon, the moon being a little bit larger, it really is just a little bit larger. It's not something that's super noticeable, but we of course like to think about this big beautiful supermoon that's happening. Of course, that does also mean we can have the opposite as well. We can have a full moon happen when the moon is furthest away from the Earth, and that is called a micromoon. And so the moon looks a little bit smaller than average, which you can see here in comparison. But again, there's not really a hugely noticeable difference in the micromoon and the supermoon compared to the average size of the moon that we see every month. A lot of people, when they go out to look at supermoons, they think the moon does look so much bigger because they're purposefully going out right when it rises. And there's a optical illusion that happens when the moon rises because you're seeing it compared to trees or buildings or things you know the size of. To your brain, the moon looks like it's huge. And then once it gets higher in the sky, you lose those references of the trees and buildings. And so your brain can't comprehend exactly how big it is. It is the same size as it was when it rose. You've just lost that comparison. And so I think that's where some of the misconception behind the supermoon being this huge thing comes from, is that optical illusion that happens when the moon is near the horizon as it's rising. The other thing taking place on May 26th with our full moon is a lunar eclipse. Yes, our first lunar eclipse of the year is happening. So a lunar eclipse can only happen during a full moon, and it happens about twice a year when the Earth, Moon, and Sun line up just right so that the moon passes directly behind the Earth into the Earth's shadow. So Earth ends up blocking the sun's light from reaching the surface of the moon and giving us that lunar eclipse. Now, depending on where the moon is in the Earth's shadow, we can get some different types of lunar eclipses. So you'll see the Earth's shadow is composed of two parts. We have the umbra, which is the dark region. If you're in the umbra, then the sun is completely blocked from your view. So no sunlight is getting to the moon. And then we have the penumbra, which is the region more of partial shadow. So a little bit of sunlight makes it through, but the sun is partially blocked from the moon's view. So depending on where the moon goes through the Earth's shadow, we get different types of eclipses. If it just passes through the penumbra, we get a penumbral eclipse, which is the least exciting because you don't really see that drastic of a difference. It dims just slightly, but because you are still getting some direct sunlight, you don't see a hugely noticeable difference. If the moon passes through the umbra, but only part of it passes through, we call this a partial eclipse. And that's when you can see part of the moon really darkened off, that part that's in the umbra, that part that's not getting any sunlight at all. And then if the entire moon passes directly through the umbra, we call that a total lunar eclipse, with totality happening while the moon is completely immersed in the Earth's umbra. And you see here, surprisingly, our total lunar eclipse is not a just dark circle. It's actually this deep copper red color. And that's an effect that comes from our atmosphere. Our atmosphere, what happens when the sun's light goes through our atmosphere acts similar to a prism, where it takes that light and it spreads it out. And that red color gets bent or refracted or spread out just enough that it ends up being redirected to the moon. And so that red light from the sun ends up hitting the moon and illuminating it, which is why our total eclipsed moon is this deep coppery red color and why it's often known as the blood moon. This eclipse happening on May 26th, for some people around the world, will be a total lunar eclipse. So I guess you could think of this as a full bloody super milk moon, if that is what you want to call it. That is what's going on. Now, for us here in Duluth, unfortunately, we are not going to see the total lunar eclipse because this is happening very early in the morning. The moon is actually going to set before it reaches totality for us here in Duluth. So for us here in Duluth, the eclipse starts at 3:47 a.m. when the moon first starts to enter the Earth's penumbral shadow. And then over the next about hour or so, it moves through the penumbra, and at about 4:44 is when it starts to enter the umbra. And that's when you'll really start to notice something happening. You'll start to notice as the moon moves into the umbra, you're seeing less and less of the moon as that part darkens that's in the umbra. Maximum eclipse for us is going to happen at about 5:23 a.m., where the moon will be about halfway into the Earth's umbral shadow. But then a few minutes after that, the moon will have set for us. So that's what we can expect to see. So if you're up about 5 o'clock in the morning on May 26th, make sure you head out and take a look at the moon to catch that eclipse going on. Now, if you are on anywhere in the East Coast of the United States, you're going to see pretty similar to what we're seeing here in Duluth. You'll get to see the beginning of the eclipse. You'll get to see the part of the partial phase, but you won't get to see totality happen. But if you are on the West Coast, you will get to see some of that totality of the total lunar eclipse before the moon ends up setting for you guys. So East Coast, we're really just stuck with the partial. West Coast, you can see the total, or at least part of the total lunar eclipse. And if you want to know the exact times for when you can see these different stages in the eclipse on May 26th, I put a link in the video description that takes you to a website that you can input your location and it'll tell you those exact times for each of those stages. All right, so that was all just the moon. So let's take a look at what's going on with the planets this month. And we're going to start off in the early morning sky where we still have Jupiter and Saturn hanging out. Throughout the month of May, we'll be able to see them pretty early before sunrise. And as we get later into the month, they'll be up earlier and earlier, being visible not too long after midnight once we get to the end of May. So any super early mornings, go out and look towards your southeast and you'll see Jupiter and Saturn hanging out there. Saturn has something else going on. On May 23rd, Saturn is going to start its next retrograde loop. So what happens during this retrograde loop is it's an optical, or not an optical illusion, it's a effect we see because the planets moving around the sun are moving at different speeds. And so we can see here that we have the Earth and then the orbit of an outer planet. The Earth, since it's closer to the sun, moves faster around its orbit than the outer planets do. And so that means every so often the Earth actually catches up and passes those outer planets. And it's during that process that we catch up and pass the planet that the planet appears to reverse direction for a little bit. And that's that retrograde motion or retrograde loop. And so for a little bit of time, it'll appear to go backwards in the sky than it normally does for a little while until we've caught up and passed it, and then it'll start moving on in its regular pattern. So for Saturn, that is going to start on May 23rd. And so you can see here, this is 2021, and I zoomed in a little bit here. So you can see this retrograde, it's been going this way throughout the year, and then starting May 23rd, it's going to reverse direction and start going backwards until about mid-October, where that retrograde loop will come to an end. We will have passed Saturn, and it'll start going back normal until the next time we catch up to it and pass it, which will be sometime next year. I just saw we got a question.
Yeah, so this is actually in reference to the astronomy day we were going to have before the pandemic happened. We were going to have a book reading, right, with Monica Adams and her book New Moon's Family. And of course that didn't happen because of the pandemic.
So we don't have any concrete rescheduled plans at the moment, but we very much want to have that event happen at some point. So once we are back open and able to do in-person events, I'm pretty sure we'll get that rescheduled so we can have that event. We were really looking forward to it and excited about it. So yeah, we'll get it to happen once things are somewhat more normal.
Hopefully this fall.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. There's a lot going on there, but we're trying. All right. So let's move on from the morning sky, where we see Jupiter and Saturn, over into the evening sky because we've got several planets that we can see up in the evening. Mercury and Venus are back out and visible. They were kind of hiding last month as they were in their orbit going kind of past the sun, and now they've come back out the other side. And so they're starting to be visible down in the west-northwest right after sunset. And then we also have Mars up there as well. So in the evening sky throughout this month, look west-northwest, and you'll see Mercury, Venus, and Mars there in a nice little line. Mercury and Venus will only be out for a little bit after sunset because they are pretty close to the sun. They do set not long after it. Mars will stay visible until about midnight, and that's when it'll set below the horizon. With Mercury, Mercury is actually going to reach what we call its greatest elongation on May 16th. And this just means it's at the point where it is the furthest that we see it from the sun in its orbit. So May 16th, that is the best day to try and go out and see Mercury in the evening because that's when it's furthest from the sun and the easiest to see. Another cool thing, at the end of the month on May 28th, Mercury and Venus are going to be incredibly close to each other. So this is what the view would look like through a pair of binoculars. So they'll be very, very close to each other. However, with them this close, Mercury will be pretty difficult to see because Venus outshines Mercury by about 280 times. It's about 280 times brighter. And so you might have some trouble seeing Mercury there beside it, but they are going to be right next to each other there on May 28th. And that's all of the planets. Uranus and Neptune are both hanging out near the sun. They're not visible so much right now, but they should be back out in a couple months. So another thing we have coming up this month, we have another meteor shower that's actually happening tonight. The peak is tonight. So in case you don't know, meteor showers happen when the Earth passes through the trail of debris that's left behind from a comet. When the comet came in close to the sun, the heat from the sun evaporated its ices, and that left this strew of debris of, like grains of sand all along its orbit. And each time we pass through that, each of those little debris, each of those little grains of sand falls through our atmosphere where they heat up and shine bright in these streaks that we call meteors or shooting stars. So this month's meteor shower is the Eta Aquarids. It's actually been going on since about April 19th and will last until May 28th. But the peak of the shower is happening tonight. Now, this is a shower that is very, very early in the morning. Best time to start to see it is around 4 a.m. So if you are one of those people who does get up early in the morning before the sun rises, you can head out, look east, and you may be able to catch a few meteors earlier in the morning before the sun comes up. And this is a moderate shower, so, dozen to a few dozen meteors per hour. Unfortunately, not long after this, the moon will rise, and so you'll start having some competing light from the moon that may make seeing meteors a little bit more difficult, but something fun to do, especially if you do have to get up super early before the sun rises. Lastly, for us here in Duluth, we have quite a few International Space Station passovers for us. This is just for the first several days of May here. And what you're looking for when you see the International Space Station passover is something more like this, where you have this moving point of light that will kind of brighten and then dim again. And so this information comes from a website called Heavens Above. I have it linked in the video description. And you can give it your location, and it'll tell you when the International Space Station will be visible from your location. And so lots going on for us here in Duluth. One of the good ones that's happening at a more reasonable time, so at about 9:18 is going to take place on May 23rd, where the International Space Station will kind of pass from northwest to northeast, starting at about 9:18 and ending at about 9:24. And so you can see the path that it will take. And that's what, if you click on any of the dates in this table that you end up getting from the website, it'll show you a map with this kind of passover with the direction and where it's going to fly over over your overhead. All right, so I think that is everything happening in the skies above. So let's take let's look at two kind of news items, or a couple of news items that I think are going to be really awesome. This first one just happened at 5:20, so about 2 hours ago. SpaceX did a test flight of their Starship SN15. So far, there have been several tests of the Starship, the idea being that this can launch and then land back so that it can be reused. Unfortunately, all of the other tests have not had good landings. They've either crash landed, or in the case of SN10, it did land, but a few minutes later it ended up exploding because there was a leak from one of the propulsion tanks. And so SN15 just did its test flight today. Like I said, about 2 hours ago. Here we can see about 4 seconds before launch. And so we had a good takeoff. You see the view from the boosters right there. So good launch.
Position and begin our descent, where hopefully a ground camera will be able to bring us live views of the flight.
Once it got kind of up in the air, we lost some camera views, but we had information from the instrument, so we saw that it did good. And then it went to go land, and here we see it kind of coming back down.
Just past T plus 4 minutes into flight, we've got the views back from the Raptor engines.
And I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. But here we are now coming back in for our landing.
And we have ignition. Starship heading back to the landing zone.
A little bit of fire there, but they did it. We had a successful landing of the SN15, and I stayed watching the stream for about an hour because SN10, it did land safely, but about 15 minutes later exploded. And last I checked, it was still good. So this seems to be the first good touchdown that the Starship has had, the first official success in landing with the SN15, which is super exciting news. I know they said they've done some improvements to the systems and guidance, and that seems to have all been incredibly successful since they did get a successful landing today. So kudos to you, SpaceX. That does an amazing job. SpaceX has been in the news as well because the Crew 1 astronauts landed back on Earth on May 2nd, so just a few days ago, after being up in the International Space Station since November of last year. They safely made it back down, touched down in the ocean for a night landing, which is actually the first time that's been done, I think, since the Apollo era, is what I was hearing. But all 4 astronauts are safely back, which is fantastic news. They have been replaced. Crew 2, 4 astronauts, is currently up at the International Space Station, and they'll be there until the fall, when they'll come back and be replaced by Crew 3, who will be going up in the fall. And lastly, it would not be me if I did not give you an update on Percy and Ingenuity. If you haven't heard, Ingenuity has been doing amazing. Not only did it just successfully fly, we have had 4 successful flights of Ingenuity. This is one of them. This was flight 3, where we can see it start to wind up, uh, take off, and then fly away. And in my head, I just keep imagining Ingenuity just going wee as it's flying. I don't know. I'm a child sometimes. But Ingenuity has had 4 successful flights. It has flown faster and further than it ever did in tests here on Earth. It has been doing amazing, far exceeded our expectations. And because of that, we are extending its mission. It is now going to kind of hang out with Percy. Percy's been sticking around to kind of watch as Ingenuity did its test so that we could have things like this video and images from Percy's point of view. But now it's getting to the time that Percy needs to head off to do her own missions, and Ingenuity is going to come with. And so Ingenuity is going to be used to kind of scout out some areas that Percy can go to, and they're just going to kind of be a little buddy team together, working. And then just one last thing from the 4th flight. We did end up getting this really awesome picture. This was taken by Ingenuity while it was up in the air. And right in the corner, right there, is Percy. So Perseverance can be seen in this picture from Ingenuity. So lots of amazing things happening there as well. All right, lastly, since it is now May, I of course gotta remind you guys that we are doing our Astronomy Day on May 22nd. We'll be set up outside the planetarium from 2 to 4 p.m., handing out free activity kits that come with 3 different activities. We will also have a 4th activity for a DIY telescope that is going to come at a small cost. Those are a little bit more expensive, but it's going to be, I think we're selling them for $10. So $10 for a DIY telescope, that's pretty cool. We'll have some fun activities and demonstrations that you can watch from a safe social distance. And we'll also be doing a raffle to give away a Lego Saturn V kit. And then that evening, we will be doing a live stream, so a virtual component for Astronomy Day. We're going to have several guests on. Bob King is going to join us. Jim Rock is going to join us. Both Lindsay and Eli, who if you've been to our shows before, you probably know them, are going to talk to us a little bit about some of the stuff they've been doing, because they also do research, and so I want them to kind of share their research they're going to be doing, because it's kind of cool to hear active stuff that's going on. We'll be pulling the winner for the raffle. There will be some telescope live stream view if the weather cooperates, so just lots of good things happening on May 22nd. All right. I'm checking to see if we had any other questions. All right. Well, if you do have any other questions, now is a great time to leave them down in the comments, and I will tell you what's coming up over the next week. So on Saturday, we will do our May constellation story time, taking you through the constellations that are up in the month of May and the stories behind them. Next Wednesday, we're going to go on an adventure through the universe and take a look at as much as we can of the universe in about 30 minutes. And the next Saturday, we're going to kind of look at traveling to space, what it takes to get there, what it takes to send our astronauts up, not just to the International Space Station, but elsewhere, and also kind of take a look at all of the accomplishments that have happened over the past year with SpaceX's Crew Dragon and all of that. So a lot of cool stuff that we're going to talk about. And yeah, that's what's coming up over the next week. All right, well, not seeing more questions, so we will go ahead and wrap it up, unless, Lindsay, you have anything you would like to say?
No.
All right.
I'm really excited to get to see people again for our Astronomy Day, since it's been such a long time.
It has. I don't think we've done anything. We haven't seen people since Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah, since Halloween. So come out and see us. We're hopefully gonna have a great day. Fingers crossed that weather cooperates. But it'll be fun. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will see you again next time. Bye, everyone.